Oh, thanks, Joe. I have one last question. There's been a lot written after the financial crisis in 2008, and even continuing today about the pressures that face higher education. On the government side, for those institutions that are supported by state and local government, there's the issue of declining state appropriations simply because the states have suffered decline in tax revenues or not been able to grow tax revenues, have increased demand for public service. And the private side, with perhaps somewhat higher prices, have faced people to saying, I really can't afford to pay for college, and they've discounted their tuition. To what extent do you think or to what extent have there been defaults? In other words, we talked about before where there's been the inability of colleges and universities to ultimately pay their debt. And to what extent do you think that might be happening? Do you think that trend may change in the next couple of years?
Well, first off, excellent question. And it's one that generally we deal with on a day-to-day basis. However, I will say this. We went through a crisis period in 2008, not just higher ed, but
right.
The whole world. But higher ed was one area where it was very rational to ask whether parents in a private higher ed scenario would continue to willingly pay $40,000 plus a year for and now sometimes 5 and 6 years to have their kid get a college degree. Or would they force those kids to go to community college, or would they say, the heck with this whole thing, we're not buying into this anymore, go get a job? The answer was not 100% either way. And in fact, community college enrollment is notoriously countercyclical, meaning that in bad times their enrollment goes up, in good times it goes down. And we saw that with strength. But what we didn't see, candidly, was private colleges and universities shuttering their doors one after another. However, at every private college and university, we did see extensive work by investment management committees and operating committees and so forth to pay attention to the fact that 5, 6, 7% annual increases in tuition were non-sustainable. And we saw a lot of attention paid, I don't know what the conclusions are, but a lot of attention paid to the whole notion of tuition discounting. And I think that those discussions will be with us for a long time in the private side. I should also say that Moody's, and particularly Moody's, but all of the rating agencies, in some cases prior to 2008, had issued negative watches with regard to private higher education. And that was motivated by a couple different things. One is that the number of traditional college-age kids that were being put into our economy, meaning 18-year-olds, was different state to state, but generally in the Northeast and the Midwest, the number of those individuals was going down. So there was, and that was projected, anticipated, and very well demonstrated. So that obviously has negative implications for private colleges and universities. In addition, though, some areas of the country, most notably upstate New York, I would say generally rural areas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, etc., were particularly targeted by the rating agencies as areas that where schools located there, unless they meet certain criterion, we're going to continue to have challenge. Particularly upstate New York Catholic institutions, which seem to be competing with each other for the same student. By contrast, those colleges and universities that had sizable endowment, as soon as it was demonstrated after 2008 that those endowments began to rebound, candidly, their fiscal picture improved dramatically, and there's not the same kind of concern. So I think there is very legitimate concern for small private college, and there always will be. It's a challenge to management of those colleges to manage properly, to stay ahead of the curve. When we speak to those colleges, we often hear about new recruitment strategies, and they often involve the recruitment of foreign students, often in large numbers, very well thought out programs. That, of course, however, leads to a series of other questions which have yet to be dealt with, and we really don't know what the fallout of that's going to be. On the public side, I think the issue is what it is. What I mean by that is public, despite the fact that it costs a lot more than it used to, is still a relative bargain with regard to private. And for folks who are looking for that experience as opposed to this experience, they're getting economically rewarded for doing that. I think the politics of public institutions are very different, and that talk about things like tenure and so on are going to be things we'll hear a lot about. Back on the private side, I think one of the things that's sort of floating under the radar but will pop up case by case is colleges' capacity to continue to offer benefits such as tuition remission, which have historically been looked at as not a big deal, but increasingly have become a very big deal. And for marginal institutions, you're going to see them cut back on that radically. So my take on this is that the pressures will be there. I think they're real, but I don't think they're paralyzing, nor do I anticipate a rush on insolvencies. I do think on a case-by-case basis, serious problems will manifest themselves, and we've been reading about some of those recently. But I think by and large, private higher ed demands intelligent management, not only on a day-to-day basis, but proactive. The ability to anticipate what's coming down the curve. And that's not easy, but I think managers that do that are going to be well rewarded, and their institution's going to be here for decades to come.
Joe, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Eric.
It was a pleasure to see you.